Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the third and final webinar in the Multiply and Mobilize series. We are so grateful that you all have tuned in and that you've been a part of this journey with us. This is not the end. This is just a new point in the process of continuing to begin the work that we're doing. So I'm going to do a quick just reminding you who we are and why we're so amazing, and then we're going to jump right into the content that we're here to receive. We are AORTA. We're the Anti-Oppression Resource and Training Alliance. We are a worker-owned cooperative devoted to strengthening movements for social justice and a solidarity economy. We are all facilitators, trainers, and consultants. The work that we do is really focused on expanding the capacity of cooperatives, collectives, community-based projects through education, training, and planning. And we have a really serious focus on movement building and mobilization. So to that end, we do a lot of direct support of social justice movements, and we also do a lot of direct support of those who are supporting social justice movements. So we're intermediaries, we're trainers, we're political educators. And those of us who are on today, who are your friendly AORTA faculty, I'm Autumn Brown. I'm tuning in from, well, currently I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota, in the offices of SEIU. It's not where I usually am, but it's where I am right now.
This is Mark Mascarena Swan. I'm here in Berkeley, California.
Manju Rajendran, tuning in from Durham, North Carolina. And this is an image of all the AORTA members and our partners and children.
Most of them.
There are more partners and more children.
There are more partners and more children. Lydia, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yes, hi, I'm Lydia, coming to you guys from New Orleans. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. I missed the last one because I was doing other AORTA work, and so I'm so thrilled to be back for the final webinar.
All right, take it away, Manju.
So just to reflect on how far we've come in the first 2 episodes of this 3-episode series, in webinar 1, where we broke down the idea of divide and conquer, we explored tactics that the system uses to divide us. And some of those that we discussed were creating a narrative that blames each group for the other group's problems. And that tactic works to foster mistrust among groups and to obfuscate the systemic inequalities of white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy. So that system tells us that each group is responsible for the other group's problems. And we can map that many times over history. We mapped that to the Bacon's Rebellion in the and to what was happening in Standing Rock in present time. Another tactic that the system uses to divide us is bribing some groups with access to some resources, material and psychological resources. And this works to align some groups with the elite over other subjugated groups. Those resources that are offered are never close to the original goals of the movement. Another key tactic the system uses is threatening to withdraw resources and threatening to enact violence against groups if they continue to ally with other subjugated groups. This creates a culture of fear that not only breaks down intergroup relationships between us, but also leads to groups being overall less bold and taking fewer risks in our pursuit of justice, freedom, and liberation. Some of the tactics we propose to unite and win are making way for healing, sparking and sustaining internal transformation within our organizations, responding at the needed speed, and sometimes that means much slower, and sometimes that means faster, practice being powerful, and coordinating among organizations like we want to win the world. Next. At webinar 2, we explored this political moment. We mapped the system's strategies, tactics, and narratives. We went over that amazing Project South tool, Building Power, We Are Winning, and we looked at the immigrant justice movement as a great way to look at various moments in history. And we learned the 8 stages of movement building, which if folks want to go a lot deeper in depth with, you can read a book called Doing Democracy. And we're actually going to be revisiting that 8 stages of movement building tool later on in the webinar as we're talking about building the Rebel Alliance. So when we fight, we win. We're going to be asking ourselves in this big conversation, how do we effectively do mobilizing and coalition building to subvert the challenging tactics that we have been really digging into in episode 1 and 2. As we're exploring building the Rebel Alliance, we're going to look at different collaborative formations and their intent, and thinking about how to develop the right structure that speaks to our capabilities and our needs as organizations and as communities in this moment. We'll be visiting with common pitfalls in alliance work and their antidotes. And on today, the 40th anniversary of Star Wars: A New Hope, we're going to be using the Star Wars analogy to go more deeply into what alliance building can look like. So in terms of lessons for movement action building, we are inviting you to use every opportunity to frame your vision, your strategy, and your demands. Our commitment is to keep our strategies agile, our structures connected to the grassroots, and our values solid. This helps when the state inevitably reorganizes itself.
It's just me. Just there's a time ahead when we think that we've lost, but only because the forces we're fighting are pushing back to try and stop our imminent victory. Right? I think those of us who follow Star Wars knows what happens next after this scene.
And as Rebecca Solnit put it, every round of activism is an experiment whose results can be applied to other situations.
So now we're going to kind of dig in. I'm going to be honest, we're going to get a little bit away from Star Wars, so then go back in to talk a little bit, right, about what are the opportunities for this moment, right? So we've talked a lot already about divide and conquer and gone over, a little bit of last time about the 8 stages of movement building, which we'll dig into deeper, but we want to talk specifically about this kind of what we can do in this moment, that there's so much at stake and that there's so much that we might be fearful of, but we can transform, right? So the beginning is, right, that we have the capacity to flip and subvert political threats into opportunities for movement building, right? It's key right now in this moment to be working with folks to identifying the underlying power structures, right, that are giving way to threats such as, right, our assaults on healthcare, our assaults on reproductive rights, our assaults on public education, our assaults at all of these different levels, right? The expansion of the policing apparatus of the state. There's so many assaults coming at us all the time. It can be easy to get overwhelmed, right? But while this is terrifying, it's also a moment of outrage, which we can be leveraging, right, to be bringing more people in and to be directing people to seeing the bigger picture, right, how these pieces interact and are connect to one another, as well as how do we actually use these moments to really not just hide, right, or turn to nihilism, but to really embrace this alternative vision of the world that we see as rooted in justice and freedom, right? And one of the ways is to deeply engage in moments of mobilization to bring new people into the work. So one of the things that these political threats produce, right, one of their contradictions actually, is that they lead to people showing up at protests and getting outraged in a collective body. These are key moments for us to be deeply showing up at and working and connecting with folks for, to be able to meet new people where they're at in that moment, right? And to connect them to organizations and a greater sense of movement building. Now, sometimes these mobilizations are going to look huge. Like, say you're in New York City, there are thousands of people can show up in an instant, and you can be, and some places, right? Say you're in the suburbs of Atlanta, it might be 15 people. Both types of mobilizations are equally important in this moment, right? And are both important for connecting with people, talking to them about why they're showing up, and that really engaging with people in that one-on-one way, which can often seem insignificant, is actually like the really critical building blocks of building our movements. Some of the hardest work is figuring out where there are other people who have similar concerns, and these mobilization moments are actually really beautiful ones for us to be engaging with as organizers, right? And that through that, and so through engaging with people in this work, we should also be continuing to center political education and leadership development to support people's long-term engagement and growth. So, right, all of us have gone through many rounds of political education. People have really invested time and energy into our leadership development. And so critical at this moment, right, is us also doing that work with people. So being able to really connect to what does it mean to be redirecting state funds from things such as healthcare into upping up the enforcement and deportation capacities of ICE, right? And what are those, and helping people actually connect those dots and see them not as these separate issues, but as issues that are deeply intertwined in terms of just the broader goals, and literally what it means to say, where do our taxpayer dollar go, right? There's actually a real concrete conversations we can be having with people, as well as opening ourselves up to being able to also learn and grow through those conversations and learning what it is that people are concerned about in the moment. And so that can look like lots of things, of creating spaces for political education, from really going deep on one-on-one conversations, having study groups, etc. But it's really a moment to really invest in people and their deepening their analysis and their skills, as well as ours, so that we can really do bold and beautiful things. And then, as the theme of our webinar today is, right, that these are really a lot of space to build alliances as a strategy to expand and leverage our movement bases to shift and transform power. Right, so that when alliances are forged, when coalitions are built, those are actually often really beautiful opportunities to be bringing people into the work. And that could both be organizations which might have not yet stepped up in that political way before, right, that have maybe been on the sidelines, and to really encourage people to join broader coalitional or alliance efforts. Or if there are spaces in alliances, creating spaces for individuals to join and also get plugged in as well. And that this is really hard and messy work, which we'll be talking about more in a bit. But it's actually really critical to fighting the divide and conquer tactics, right? It's our alliance building, our refusal to be siloed, our refusal to be pitted against each other in these ways is really one of our most critical strengths for movement building. And that we also need to be thinking about how to be building in those alliances, folks, that we have not in the past, and to push ourselves to an openness, right, of engaging with people who we might not have, for various reasons, because it felt hard, because it felt scary, because we didn't see them quite ready, whatever that might be, but that this is a moment really of stretching ourselves to be the most powerful organizers we've ever been. Next slide, right? And so as we're in this moment of so many people wanting to get involved, we have to really be thinking together about what are the ways we're setting ourselves up to be welcoming new people into this moment. So one of the articles that was sent out in advance, right, was this really beautiful piece written by Alicia Garza, who's a long-term organizer and also one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, where she wrote about, after the Women's March, there were some critiques that started showing up about it, and she asked, she said a lot of really powerful things about this is actually a really beautiful time, right, for all of these new people to be showing up, which doesn't mean that there isn't work to be done with these people, but that this is powerful. This is actually the type of thing we need to keep doing over and over and deepening. And she articulated that, right, hundreds of thousands of people are trying to figure out what it means to join a movement. If we demonstrate that to be part of a movement, you must believe people cannot change, that transformation is not possible, that it's more important to be right than be connected and interdependent. We will not win. If our movement is not serious about building power, then we are just engaged in a futile exercise of who can be the most radical. So the question is, how do we maintain our political positions, right? That we're principled, that we refuse to be divided in these moments, but that we're also creating the spaces to be actively welcoming new folks in, right? So that they can also go through this process, right? And so some of these questions that we all need to be asking ourselves in whatever types of organization or groups that we might be coming from are, what are our strategies for welcoming in new people to our organizations? How are we actually orienting people? How are we mentoring them, right? What does that actually look like? How are we avoiding insider talk, right? Really creating the spaces for people who are either completely newly politicized or maybe just haven't been involved for a period of time for various reasons that we all drop in and out of movement spaces, to really be bringing them in and having deep conversations, right? And that while many of us, I think, want to always have our kitchens in order before like we bring everyone new in, that's actually not how movement building works. And so sometimes our kitchen is messy and we still offer people tea, right? So like that as our ethos of like, how do we keep bringing folks in all the time, knowing it's going to be imperfect, knowing that it's going to be messy, right? But that we actually don't have the luxury of not bringing folks in this moment. And so that's key, right? And one of the other things we have to be really thinking about is within the left, we have often some countercultural tendencies, which many are beautiful. I come out of some of them, right? But that they can also be at times alienating to new folks. And we have to be really thinking about how do we avoid or adapt those tendencies in ways that actually bring in a lot of different types of people from a lot of different types of backgrounds and cultural experiences. And I mean this both in terms of things like race or class or gender or sexuality, like I mean it on those like identity things, but I also mean it in terms of like, we can't have a cool scene because cool scenes are inherently exclusionary, right? Like we want our movements to be cool, but we don't want to have something where it's like only the coolest people get to be involved, because that's not movement building work. So how do we actually build out our spaces to be welcoming of lots of different types of people, even if, for instance, they eat different types of food or listen to types of music than us? That seems simplistic, but it often, unfortunately, isn't. And then as these newcomers are coming in, how are we connecting with them? How are we deeply engaging and talking with them about what their stakes are in this work? What brought them in the room? And what does it look like to really go deep on some one-on-ones about with questions such as what brought you here? What are you passionate about? What's at stake for you in this work? Where are you excited to plug in? What skills do you have? What skills do you want to learn, right? These are, we have things to offer people and people have things to offer us. And we have to really see this mutual relationship developing over and over again. And that part of this work too, no, we're fine on them, is that as Drew Christopher Joy of the Southern Maine Workers Center says in actually an interview with Chris Cross that was also sent out earlier, right? We need to be really thinking about this work as organizers. And Drew says this really smart thing about how the question is always of how to move people from their own experience, right, to understanding root causes of systemic injustice. As an organizer, it says Drew, as an organizer, my job is to really show up with love and patience to those conversations while holding a strong anti-racist line and hopefully moving people into action, right? We're trying to understand what people's stake is in this work, and then we're trying to actually scale up their sense of belonging to the broader, to people that are maybe quite unlike them in many ways, and to really see those fates as interconnected and interdependent. And so one of the ways that is really helpful for thinking about this is in terms of, right, solidarity. That's my cue, Autumn. Yeah, solidarity. So, right, so one of the guiding questions that Aorta returns to a lot is from this quote from Aurora Levins-Morales, who we showed a poem from in our first webinar, right? In which she says that solidarity is not a matter of altruism. Solidarity comes from the inability to tolerate the affront to our own integrity of passive or active collaboration in the oppression of others, and from the deep recognition of our most expansive self-interests. From the recognition that, like it or not, our liberation is bound up with that of every other being on the planet, and that politically, spiritually, in our heart of hearts, we know that anything else is unaffordable, right? So that we really are building a movement that we have stake, right? And we have a stake in other stakes as a collective. And there was recently a really great organized, I forgot about this. I jumped ahead in my slides. So some of the ways to be thinking about this, right, is how do we move people from one-time actors to long-term alliance builders in a solidarity framework, right? So there's lots of different ways that people show up in movements. And so one way we can think about this are kind of 4 different stages of people being involved. And that these 4 stages are not always linear, right? Because things often aren't, but some ways that track. So there are lots of folks, right, who can be one-time actors, right? So people who show up once for a protest, maybe sign a petition, make a donation, make a phone call, right? Like do something. It's a great thing to do, but it's like a one-time kind of event that folks do. And we want to really move people, right, from those one-time events to really deepening kind of their commitments to the work. And another way we can really think about doing that is engaging in hard conversations with people. So how do we get folks, how do we both as organizers get folks to have deep conversations about why, right? For instance, we actually can't talk about there being deserving and undeserving immigrants, right? That some people should get sanctuary and some people should not. Some people should get pathways to citizenship or not be deported, and some people should not, right? But actually really having a bigger conversation about these issues in ways that helps people transform and think, and that they themselves then start to move from saying, oh, I'm not just going to go to this protest about this issue, but I'm also going to be talking really deeply with people in my lives about this issue, right? That is actual political organizing work itself. So that there's like having folks do one-time action, so really engaging in deep, harder conversations, right, about systemic oppression and the ways that we can be working against it. And then the other piece, right, is around getting down. And by getting down, what we have is, right, people actually maybe showing up together, right, to show up in solidarity around a particular action, right? So it's organizing some type of group in solidarity with some other type of group on a particular issue or campaign or cultural program, right? So it's really people working together in an organized collective fashion to take some steps forward in this in an ongoing solidarity relationship with people who are particularly targeted by the policies at hand, right? And then finally, right, where we really want to get all of us being is on team liberation or the Rebel Alliance, of really being in a space to be building, helping those organizations be building ongoing alliances, right, that have really the capacity to expand our capacities to make change and transform power in the world. And so to talk kind of about this in a more concrete way, we wanted to lift up the recent organizing of the Black Mamas Bailout Action that happened around this past Mother's Day. That was something that was instigated by Southerners on New Ground, or SONG, right, which is a several decade old, right, queer organization really rooted in people of color, working class and poor, immigrant, trans, right, all, like elders and young people, kind of really visionary organizing based in the South. So over the last few months, back in March, at one of SONG's recent retreats, there was proposed by their co-director, Black lesbian Mary Hooks, the idea of doing an action around Mother's Day. And that the action would be kind of organizing, having SONG spearhead a broader coalition of organizing to get folks to bail out Black mamas, and Black mama really kind of broadly defined, right? So mama, both people with biological children and not cis and trans women, right? But Black women who are understood to just generally be in the role of mothering and nurturing and community building with families and neighborhoods in all sorts of ways. So to be doing a bailout of Black mamas across the country as a way to kind of both be giving be giving women literal freedom, right? And to two, to be really challenging and calling attention to the exploitation of cash bail, where, right, so many people are locked up not because they've actually been convicted of anything, but because they just literally don't have the funds to get out of jail once they've been arrested. And that to have that as an entry point to having a broader conversation about mass criminalization and the impacts of policing and prosecution and prisons, right, on Black communities in particular, and that this was an idea that really sprung up from also Song's connection to the Movement for Black Lives policy platform, which put abolishing cash bail as one of its central demands in its really kind of visionary program. So there was this huge kind of idea that and ended up having over 24 local and national organizations, almost all Black-led, really working with Song around this National Day. Those groups include folks from the Brooklyn Bail Fund, to Black Lives Matter Birmingham, to the Los Angeles Community Action Network, to the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. So a whole bunch of different orgs working at really different scales, nonprofits, smaller collectives, right? And together, right, they raised over a 3-week period, tens of thousands of dollars. 3,000 people gave, and over 100 Black mamas were bailed out from Atlanta to Durham to Little Rock and Chicago. So all in this lead up to Mother's Day. And so it was this highly successful campaign and got a ton of media, right, to again bring the conversation about cash bail to the forefront, really centering a racial and gender justice analysis, right, with lots of ways for folks to plug in, which was really kind of beautiful. And then to continuing to push for the abolition of cash bail. So this is a way for us to be thinking. I tell this story because I want to show that in this campaign, there were actually those different ways of plugging in and really showing up out of a solidarity movement building framework to show up, right? So we want to think about one-time actors of people who do a one-term event, minimal action, making a donation, showing up at a protest, voting at a polls, right? Lots of people donated, right? That was like the most easy one-time action. I know lots of people I know donated, and donated, I mean like $5 to $15, not huge sums of money, right? But lots of people made a one-time donation, were moved by the issue when they saw the call, they gave some money. Other folks, right, engaged in deeper conversations, right? They went to the next step. They had conversations with family and friends and others about why they should maybe give, right? To help people learn more about the issue of cash bail, to learn more about kind of the incentives at municipal levels and having people staying locked up to make revenue, right, off of people being left in cages. And to have bigger conversations about what would it mean to live with a world without prisons or policing, and how these systems are fundamentally, right, racist, sexist, based in capitalism. So really engaging in those conversations. And a number of groups actually did solidarity actions that really straddle the line of engaging in deeper conversations and getting down, where they did political education events, right, around the campaign and around the issue to really publicize it even more. I know that there was a really big, there were some done in Richmond, Virginia was one of the like kind of main places, but there were other ones as well as groups of people just deciding to organize as crews to give money, right? So showing up in a bigger kind of collective way. And that then we can really see in this team liberation or rebel alliance framework, right? That there were so many groups involved in this process, right? That there was over 24 groups across the country really working together on this issue, and also deeply informed, right, by longer organizing history. Many, if not all of those groups, right, had with each other to different degrees, and out of kind of the broader movement for Black lives. So I think it's really critical to be thinking about how this campaign held lots of ways for people to get involved, that met people where they were at, but also both offered at times opportunities for people to get deeper in doing the work, as well as created examples of how we can be thinking about in our movement work, how to be both, you know, really giving people some concrete wins, like getting out of jail, as well as showing kind of the bigger picture and revealing the deeper political issues at play that we need to be fundamentally transforming and shifting so that we change the conversation about the world that we want to live in. I'm good.
Good. Could I just mention that Jenna Peters Golden, Aorta member from Philadelphia, just shouted out that Philly's Mama's Bailout Day raised about $40,000 in 1 week. We bailed out nearly 15 folks in times for Mother's Day. And then there was this point from Eddie in the Q&A section. I think the engaging in hard conversations piece is where a lot of newcomers feel alienated. Do you have insight on making this piece the most effective as possible to continue to grow our base and not lose people? That's a question for you, Lydia, and there's a follow-up component. If we are losing people after engaging in hard conversations, how much energy do you think we should put into minimizing this compared to spending energy on the first step?
I mean, I think it's still really critical. I think that engaging in hard conversations is usually a multi-timed thing, right? Like, I don't think that we usually have one conversation and that's it. I think part of it is really going in and asking, it's hard. And I don't think we're going to leave 100% agreeing all the time, right? But I think also really leading with a sense of question and curiosity. I think generally, right, do you think folks should be locked up in jail for weeks just because they can't afford bail, and this other person might have gone out just because they actually have more access to resources? Like, I think asking those types of questions. And if not, let's talk about it. Let's go there. And I think that we need to go there not as I know better than you, but like, I really have these particular ethoses that are in me. And I'm wondering what's going on with you. What are the thoughts? Are you scared, right? Does it feel dangerous? What's going on there? And I think that if we don't have those conversations, right, we're not actually doing the transformative work we need. And so I think that, and we have to know that not everyone is actually going to be willing to move, but I think a lot of folks are. And I think the question is not to like be a didactic person, right? These are all the reasons why you must agree with me now. Not that I'm saying that's what you're doing, because I don't know you, so I don't know. I assume not. But also really thinking about what are the ways that we're constantly pushing the conversation about really what does it mean to get free. And I think that is for me, that's the guiding piece, but to also be really generous and thinking about what are folks thinking about, and really listen, and don't just have like stock answers for they say this, so then I say that, but really where are they coming from? Where are they at? What's going on with them? And I don't think any of this is like we should do this and we shouldn't do that, but it's a process of us always doing all those things. And I think the conversation piece is the hardest part. It's the hardest piece of organizing, and it's often really also the glue.
Just to chip in on that, I think that's right. And there's like an Aikido move, but thing that I find effective where you find the value that you share in common in what they're sharing. Like really certain that involves like really, like Lydia's saying, deep listening and engagement. Where's the value that we share in common, and then and illuminating that and building from that point. To where how can we build out from that to find common ground? There should be something in there. If there isn't, then you probably are wasting your time.
I would add a third element of storytelling. Like, I think rooting it in our own personal experience and sharing practical examples is helpful too.
So we're talking about building Team Rebel Alliance. We just wanted to run a few lessons about alliance building in general. And there is actually some of these slides on here. You'll see a thinking that's come out of the Movement Strategy Center. So just full acknowledgement to we're sharing some of the ideas, and there's a really great piece that they wrote called Nuts and Bolts of Alliance Building. That's very valuable. So alliance, there's so many different types of formation that we can be involved in. Just to run through real quick, we have networks, and they tend to be more information sharing and relationship building. I think the big versions like the US Social Forum or the Allied Media Conference, but the effective ways of making sure that we're not reinventing the wheel, and we're actually lifting up and learning from each other. Tactical alliances tend to be, more short-term, defined collaborations, lower levels of political unity, really about trying to get the goods. Coalitions opportunities to move us from a place where we generally don't know what each other does and we're working in a vacuum on short-term issue-specific silos, and moving intentionally towards a greater impact that comes from the integration of collective efforts. And that can really be, in my experience at least, they tend to be more sectoral. We work on this area of the movement, right? Strategic alliances, there's a bigger impact, longer term vision. They tend to be more than the sum of their parts, and they're really rooted in deeply held values of solidarity. A big example right now would be the Climate Justice Alliance, which, you know, it started from points of unity, building out from the groundwork of environmental justice, establishing an alliance, and out of that growing the Our Power campaign, you know, which is a multi-goal, multi-year with trans-local, so rooted in each local has its own unique strategies tied to something larger, right? And then sometimes we'll see mergers happening, you know, where there's such common cause, such alignment, such sharing in vision and purpose that combining resources for bigger effects. Some criteria. This is definitely adapted from some of the work that Movement Strategy Center has done. But things to examine when you're in a process of coalition building or you're struggling with an alliance that you're in. Getting grounded in purpose, like what is it that you actually set out to accomplish together? What's the reason that this thing exists? And you can really get at that question not by asking a paid staff member or someone who's obviously in leadership, but by a participant in that alliance. Do you have a real clear understanding of what we hope to accomplish here? Capacity, you know, the time and resources each group is actually not just on paper, but really contributing to the alliance. Is there a dedicated coordinator? Are they paid? Does each group have folks who are dedicated to participating? Is there time, resources, and momentum? And then there's the tricky part of this is actually the groups that most are often affected by the issue that you're working on or have the most political leadership to bring tend to be the least resourced, the least financially resourced. So just balancing that in how we're thinking about capacity building and directing resources that way. Structure tends to come up a lot. So is the way this thing works clear to everyone who's involved in it? And does it, and then not just on paper, but does it actually function the way that we wrote it down? And it can be measured by, like, when a group's trying to make a decision, does it struggle with how the decision is actually going to be enacted? Does it struggle with who gets to make decisions? Does it forget what it decided? Does it not do what it said it would do, right? And then the piece that's so often buried, but, you know, it's been lifted up by Amory in the notes, like, speaking to values and culture. Like, what's the core values of this alliance? How are they expressed? How do things actually get accomplished in practice? What are the implicit and unspoken norms that we operate under? And just to say that, you know, structure is often shaped by the pre-existing culture of a group. So, for example, if a group has a culture that really values grassroots membership, it will likely adopt a structure that requires a grassroots majority, right? So getting clear on this cultural, the values piece and the cultural shape is really going to inform how you allocate resources to build capacity, what your sense of purpose is, and the structure that you choose. And from this strategy emerges in a way that's going to be more sustainable. And you know, not that all those things have to be completely worked out, but strategy is going to emerge from that solid foundation. This is just a quick. I just wanted to touch on this. You know, we just wanted to touch on this very quickly. I think we're more clear about the emerging stage of an alliance when, you know, it could the period between gaining traction and like an official launch. You know, founding meetings where you're hammering out the vision, the purpose, and so on, and strategy, and the established part where you're moving, you're evaluating, you're reflecting. But the part that we don't often talk about is the dissolving part. And there's a period in an alliance's life where members either intentionally or unintentionally disband, and it can be a really fruitful time, right? Just as flowers, go to seed, like you can harvest those seeds and put them into future ventures. And if we're not sort of acknowledging that something has truly run its course, and this is true in alliances, as it's true in our organizations and our political groups, then as things fracture, it can become very, very personalized. And rather than saying this container has run its course and it's time to, if we acknowledge that, then we can take components and move those forward in ways that are productive. Some key challenges we see. One is who decides on who's deciding, and one which I think is explained itself, but what we find is helpful is to have an interim body that's deciding to get the ball rolling, but that has a defined mandate. We are here to help establish, some clear criteria for our work, get sort of a foundational values document, a basic strategy, and then then there's a democratic process of opening it up to the actual membership who are moving, and that process is really transparent. Another dynamic of trying to be everything to everybody. Often, like when groups initially come together, everyone's got their own thing that they're working on, and they want their own stake and their own investment, but we can't be all these things. And so there might be a shifting as the alliance begins to settle, of the groups who were at the center moving to the outside, groups who are the outside moving to the inside. And that's a natural process, and to acknowledge that and expect it. What did we say we were doing again? Again, speaks for itself, but it can be an indication that there's a lack of capacity, staff time, that people are unclear of what's being decided, or that people are hesitating moving forward because there's a fundamental difference that really needs to be addressed or resolved, which doesn't always have to go to ideological debate. It can run its course through the work of practice and like getting concrete and pragmatic and seeing how those differences play out in action rather than ideologically. And then the last one is, we need to have everyone at the table. And I think this is such a delicate balance. Like, we need to do our due diligence. We need to reach out to key players. And there can be, especially for well-funded groups, just establishing themselves in a community that's already been moving, that has, history with it and relationship to place. And there can also be this movement tendency to only engage in things that we start, and that we're not gonna join in because someone else made that thing, and we have hurt feelings around that. So holding those things in dynamic tension. So I'm going to touch on this real quickly because we have a handout that has more sort of tips and tools for alliance building work, especially multiracial coalition building. But some tendencies: focusing energy on taking down other social justice groups instead of, what we find is really effective is actually having spaces to work out differences and really putting energy and time into power mapping. Who are the decision makers, the people in institutions that we actually need to focus our energy towards? Another tendency of ignoring deep-seated tensions between racial groups. So engaging in political education in the different ways racism is enacted against various communities of color, having those courageous conversations, and with the knowledge that when we don't, they will arise in the most stressful and fast-paced organizing moments. So we need to make room for heal. There can be a tendency to limit the interaction and relationships between groups and communities to their common cause or campaign that's bringing you together, but really breaking that and trying to build common cause around other ways of interacting, like skills building, relationship building, community meals, trainings on direct action, for example. I'm hoping that some of our panelists might talk to this a little bit more, but the delaying response for fear of taking imperfect action can be a real tendency on the left in our movements. But remembering that what we balance this dynamic tension between practicing consent, collective care, accountability, listening to critique, moving forward at the pace of trust, and remembering that the most effective practices are usually responsive to the moment and the issue that's at hand. And then the last piece, insisting on doing things the way they've always been done, or rejecting the past and trying to adapt to the needs and potential of the present moment, and keeping those valuable history lessons in mind and utilizing people's wisdom to forge new paths forward.
And big props to our coworker Jenna for developing that tool. This 8 stages of movement building thing that we went a lot more deeply into on the last webinar, just wave if you remember this tool. Okay, great, lots of you remember this tool. Stages 1 through 8 go like this, and they happen to map really beautifully to the Star Wars sequence. So if you think of stage 1 as Phantom Menace, stage 2 as Attack of the Clones, stage 3 Ripening Conditions, Revenge of the Sith, stage 3.5 Rogue One, stage 4 Star Wars A New Hope, stage 5 The Empire Strikes Back, stage 6 Return of the Jedi, stage 7 Return of the Jedi Continued, stage 8 The Force Awakens. So go back, please. In normal times, there's the status quo. Things are the way they are and they go uncontested. In stage 2, the role of organizers is to prove the failure of official institutions by testing them in a very public performed way. Stage 3, as conditions ripen, we hasten the ripening through our on-the-ground organizing, our educational work, our agitation. Stage 4, there is a takeoff, a trigger event that is outside of our control, but we've been preparing for its potential. Stage 5, we often feel that we have failed because we have been preparing for a long time. We've been doing the education, the agitation, the organizing, and this trigger event happened. There was an explosion of public awareness, but why have we not won yet? Why have the power holders not handed over the power yet? In fact, why has there been major power holder pushback? But what we don't understand that actually is the darkness before the dawn, or actually I think that framing of darkness is really problematic. That is actually just the moment of hopelessness before we have a major breakthrough. Stage 6, we've won majority of public opinion, and there have been many rounds of stages 1 through 5 before we get to stage 6, but we've won the majority public opinion, and then we move into a period that we could consider success, where the paradigm we've been fighting for, which was considered at the margins, is now at the center. And our goal in stage 8 is to continue the struggle. So if we could move to the next slide, Autumn. So a way that we could think about this is that the status quo was when Sith rulership was just lurking in the cloaks of democracy. We could map that period using Supreme Chancellor Palpatine's rise to power. And then we saw normal channels fail. As Sith occupation, injustices increased. We saw attempted kidnappings where our fighters were able to snatch folks back. And then conditions really ripened with incidents like the kidnapping of Princess Leia, leader of the Rebel Alliance. And there was conditions ripening through the growing discontent against Empire rumbling across the galaxy. We would say that the takeoff event was when Luke destroyed the Death Star. And we saw through that the Empire's prime weapon was actually destructible, which increased the public's hope in movement alternatives. 3 years later, the Rebel Alliance had been driven away from their home base by Empire. There was a total loss of hope. And many would say that the movement had failed, that the rebel alliance had fully crumbled. But when we saw that second trigger event of the second Death Star being destroyed, we could see the victory spread, and that feeling of transformation occur through that triumph over the Galactic Empire. Lovers reaffirmed love. There was a lot of species unity that really helped defeat the forces of evil. But the struggle was not over, right? Like, we thought that evil was defeated forever, but 30 years later, the First Order rises up from the ashes of the Galactic Empire and needed to be imposed by the reignited, women-led Rebel Alliance, and the struggle continues. So that's like a really broad, really rapid mapping of a tool that we've looked at before, the 8 stages of movement building, using the Star Wars analogy. But for the next half hour, we're going to chat with our comrades, Morgan Phillips, Terry Marshall, and Chris Crass, who are not only extraordinary organizers and longtime movement builders, communications geniuses, badass facilitators, action educators, but also super Star Wars nerds. Do we have all of your voices online? Can we hear you?
Yes. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Hello?
Hello?
Fabulous. So Morgan Phillips is a trainer and writer in using visionary fiction for direct action and social change. You can check out her work in Octavia's Brood and Through Beautiful Trouble. She's in Boston, Massachusetts. And Morgan, if you want to introduce yourself any further before you launch in, you have about 5 minutes to share.
No, that sounded great. Did you want us to just start with thoughts now, or you want to introduce everybody?
Sure. I could introduce all 3 of you, and then we could go into the questions. Terry Marshall is an organizer, a designer, a communications strategist, and a cultural worker. You can check out his work at Intelligent Mischief, and he's also based in Boston. Terry, do you want to share anything about who you are?
No, that was good enough. That's enough.
And Chris Crass is a facilitator and an author of the book Towards Collective Liberation and Towards the Other America Anti-Racist Resources for White People and Taking Action for Black Lives Matter. He's based in Louisville, Kentucky. Anything else you want to add, Chris?
Sounds great.
He's also one of the co-founders of Catalyst Project, one of our sister organizations. So friends, what was the Rebel Alliance? How did it form, and what was its power? And maybe we can just go in order. So Morgan, Terry, and Chris, go ahead and answer that question. What was the Rebel Alliance? How did it come together? What was its power? What did it take for them to win?
So one of the things that I thought of when you sent the questions ahead of time is this idea that one of the about Star Wars is that the actual story isn't super political, in that there's not a lot of going into the politics of the Senate, the Rebel Alliance. It's almost that this space that is like a playground where we apply our anti-imperialist ideas to what's happening in the storyline. And so it's like a sandbox where we get to play out what would it mean to act on our conviction around liberation, the fight for it, outside of the politics of what it is. I mean, the Rebel Alliance is made up of all of these people, including exiled senators, royalty. It's interspecies, intergalactic. It's people. It brings in people from rural, impoverished communities, and as well as people from densely populated space stations and urban centers. It's former military people. You know, I think it's like, it's everybody. And the fun part about it is that it's everybody, acting on these deeply held feelings of reacting to what is overt evil and oppression and saying we are going to act on it. And we get to watch that and then put ourselves in there, and that's kind of the fun playground piece of it. And we take the story where we need to kind of exercise and practice that feeling. And I think it's really important with Star Wars is to look at it and say, what did it take for them to win? And in truth, it was immense sacrifice. There's nothing about Star Wars that isn't, you can't talk about it without acknowledging that, like, wow, a lot of people died in that story, and immense sacrifice was had. People give up life, planet, you know, you're rooting in anything, and you went forward because you had this conviction and shared vision. And I think it's like a very extreme example of like the smaller idea that like you got to throw in, you got to be all in, you got to say, yeah, I buy this, I'm going in, I'm into this, I'm here, I'm present, I'm with this. I mean, it's just like a very like to the 10th degree example of that. But that is sort of what that shared vision that people bought into is what was a big part of their success.
That's beautiful. Terry.
Yeah, I'll try to make some points quickly. I was trying to figure out how to do this without nerding out too hard in Star Wars history and lore.
Yo, take it there. Just take it there in a sort of annotated way, so that if someone had never heard of the nerdy thing, you were explaining it along the way.
Okay, try to do this. Yeah, I think some of the most important parts of what made up the Rebel Alliance and why it was able to win is primarily what's on the surface. If you've seen any of the movies or the stories, you see, we know Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Princess Leia, and what you see is mostly white and mostly male, right? Leadership. But I want to concentrate a little bit on the more subtle stories. If people could remember from, I think, Return of the Jedi, General Akbar, who is anyone who hasn't seen Star Wars or has seen, he was the kind of lobster-looking character, right, who's commanding the ships. And a little bit of his story is that what was not very explicit is that the Galactic Empire is very, very designed after fascism and the Nazis. So in the Galactic Empire's theory and belief was that they was instinctively like racist. So everyone you see in the Galactic Empire is only humanoid looking. Mm-hmm. And you see the Rebel Alliance is quite interspecies, right? So it's like multiracial. So, and General Akbar was a part of a race of people who was actually enslaved. And so members of the Rebel Alliance actually freed him from slavery and actually promoted him to be the top admiral of the Starfleet ships. And then that gained his people, the people he came from who has special skill of building starships, to join the Alliance. And then he was promoted to the highest leadership, and they was only able to beat the Galactic Empire because they had the skill of this group who was considered inferior and actually enslaved by the Galactic Empire, you know. And so the Rebel Alliance was able to always acknowledge the other species, other beings, and recognize, and not just in a superficial way, like, oh, we should just be together. It was recognizing people's special talents and putting them in roles and not trying to restrict and narrow who they were, their identity. I think another thing for that was that Princess Leia actually does lead very high role. So in the more subtle ends of the stories, in the in-between spaces on the edges, right, where we always talk about fighting from the periphery, you'll find actually what's key to their victories was being like interspecies, actually allowing leadership of or promoting leadership of women and other folks who are considered inferior by the Empire. That kind of helps lead them to victory. It kind of plays over and over again, and especially in the new Star Wars trilogy that will be coming out in the later years. I'll cut there.
Thank you so much, Terry. Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I think building on this, there's like the Princess Leia's leadership. She's got a fierce clarity of her vision, and the vision is to destroy the Empire. And so everybody who comes into the Rebel Alliance, which actually is able to grow to scale quite quickly. So it's like all of the people who are oppressed by the Empire, which is the vast majority of the galaxy, and the Rebel Alliance, they're able to say, we're against the empire and we believe in your development as part of the Rebel Alliance through your practice over time fighting the empire. We don't need you to go to 10 years of a study group before you can start fighting the empire. We can get you into this process right now against the empire, and you see Princess Leia's unbelievable defiance against Darth Vader, which won the hearts of a whole generation. And so her defiance, her clarity of vision puts forward then, this is what we're up opposed to. You're either on this side of history or you're on the just side of history. And so you unite the galaxy around that. But the Rebel Alliance, so I was watching Return of the Jedi last night on the eve of the 40th anniversary. And it's incredible that the two people who are leading the missions, Lando Calrissian's leading the mission against the Death Star, and Han Solo's leading the mission to bring down the shield generator on Endor. And so Han Solo, working class smuggler who was not deeply committed to the alliance, made fun of it, made fun of the Force, but over time, through building of relationships, was won over. He even betrayed his folks and left at the end of Star Wars, but then returned and redeemed himself. There's a culture of redemption, a culture of transformative justice in the Rebel Alliance that I think is clear, that is based on an analysis that historic and institutional injustices of the empire create conditions which compromise people, which create misery for people, where Lando Calrissian, sacrifices maybe some of his values and principles because the empire is threatening his people in Cloud City. So you have Han Solo is rising through the Rebel Alliance, becomes a leader, and has his skills and his leadership. Again, he isn't kept out because he doesn't know all the history. He's not kept out because he doesn't have all the right words and the right lingo. He's not part of the elite of the Rebel Alliance ideologically. But he has skills, he has commitment, he has passion, and he's promoted in leadership. Lando Calrissian, again, the Empire put enormous pressure on him. I'm sure they promised austerity measures against Cloud City and against authoritarian rule. And so he compromises the rebel leaders. He betrays them, but he fiercely apologizes. And Princess Leia and Chewbacca are not at all holding back on their anger towards him. And they come out of that process with a deeper level of trust as they fight against the stormtroopers, as they fight to try to save Han Solo. And Lando ends up leading the Rebel Alliance forces against the Death Star in Return of the Jedi. Again, this incredible culture of we are in this to end the Empire. We are all in this together to fight for our lives, and we are trying to build at scale and bring as many people and as many folks into this struggle. And if you've got the skills, if you've got the passion, you've got the commitment, then you can bring leadership. And so Princess Leia is this incredible leader, but she's been raised in the resistance. She's been raised in the rebellion, but she's not holding back newcomers saying, well, okay, where were you back in this protest, 5 years ago? Where were you, Lando, with this, and that? They're like, okay, Lando, you're ready to throw down and you've proven yourself and you've got this redemption. Let's fight and destroy the Empire.
Hell yes. We can get with that. So how can we translate the Rebel Alliance for our current political conditions?
I was thinking I think a lot about this stuff generally, but I was particularly thinking about it the last couple of days. And one of the things that when I do trainings with people that I talk a lot about is that, I do a lot of story-based strategy, narrative-based work around action planning, but I talk a lot about how if you don't know, you need to know your story and your narrative, but you need to know your opposition story and narrative too. You need to know where they're coming from. And I think I love the Rebel Alliance dearly, but I think they haven't quite figured out what the dark side story and why is it better to have this overt domination over the galaxy versus having overt domination in the Senate? What is it about the Senate that they hate so much? What is it about having any, they couldn't even handle an imperial Senate. They got it, so what is their motivation? Because I think both in the Rebel Alliance and in the First Order and the Empire is like this failure to diversify tactics. So what sometimes, so that they're, building giant bases that can destroy planets, and then we're attacking and blowing them up. And so you're in this constant game, which to me is exactly what we fall into in our organizing in our communities is, there is the opposition on one side, which is constantly coming up with new barriers and new ways that they're oppressing communities and new ways to build on old oppressions or reform them so they don't look the same, but they're still there. And then we react and we're organizing against it. And it's like finding out why, what's the narrative and the story there, and then how do we change our approach to transformation that addresses how to undo and thwart that story. And I think like that's someplace, like again, like that playground that science fiction and fantasy gives to us is to play in that, and to not just look at the great things that these stories give us, but the failings of the characters that we love and the failures of their moments and their movements, to then play in them and think about, you know, oh, like what would have been done differently to fix that? And how can I think about my own work in that way? But I think like what both Terry and Chris have been saying about that shared vision and value piece is like what was key, which is key to the momentum, right? When we are able to express our shared value, but then know the story of our opposition to be able to articulate how they are in direct opposition to our value. And then that's what inspires people, right? That's what it's like, they see the contradiction and the conflict between the two. And then that mobilizes people around that idea. And then it's not like, I really liked what Chris said about like, you don't have to go to a study group to figure all that out over the course of a couple years, but you just, that happens in the relational work of organizing. And I think Star Wars is a great example of kind of where that happens. And then I always say that one of the great things that Star Wars I learned from it is that you can be a princess, a rebel commander, and a general all at the same time. And we should all remember that when we're organizing. You're all of those things at once, and it's great.
Yeah, I guess I'll throw in, I feel like just repeating what Morgan and Chris is saying, totally a lot of the same points I had written up before. I love the factor in Star Wars of redemption that like keeps playing over and over again, like Darth Vader, Lando, Clarissa, like all these people. Even like the new series, there's a former stormtrooper who joins the Rebel Alliance, and I think the lesson from that, exactly what Morgan's saying, is that never think that that the other side is completely lost or completely evil, right? Like there has to be something in your strategy and tactics of like, how do you win over a massive number of people who right now could be on the other side or believe they're on the other side. Mm-hmm. And you see that in Star Wars, like people constantly being redeemed and coming over to the rebel force. And I think less for us, we should be in our strategies and tactics of like, how we're gonna need everyone to like actually get to liberation. We're gonna need everyone. So how can we actually win over a chunk of people who seem to be supporting something else, right? And I think now in that day and age, but also with principles, because I think right now within popular discourse, it's popular to be like, after the election, people saying like, we gotta learn the dialogue, America has to learn dialogue. But I think we're like, without principles or without politics, that just ends up being like, people thinking just talking to each other in and of itself without resolving any of the problems that are differences we actually really have is like good into itself, right? So it's like I could have coffee with a Nazi, is all great. That's like that in itself is progress. It's like no, that's not what we mean when we say dialogue or so, right? Like what's the actual problems with the people who's living under the empire, who's the stormtrooper who joins the rebel force in the new trilogy, right? He starts to realize himself like, man, this is not what I want to do. Why am I forced to kill people? Why I gotta have this life? Like you gotta tap into like what's their narrative, what's their story, and how can you win over to our assumptions, right? How's our world better? And that's it's not just people on the side, but it's like the massive people who haven't made up their mind, but are all suffering under the system. It's like, how do you tap into that and win them over?
Mm-hmm. All right, so for me, just like a few things, and this is just such an honor to be able to talk about this on the 40th anniversary of Star Wars. I mean, what a momentous occasion as we build the Rebel Alliance now. And I feel like after the Trump victory was a real clarity of like the Rebel Alliance massively expanding. And so, for me, there's a couple of things. There's one, okay, so to step out of the actual story, for those of us who grew up with the original movies, many of us have a difficult relationship to the prequels. And I've had a very difficult relationship to the prequels myself. But as my son who's 5 and as my partner who did not grow up on Star Wars, she did not see the Star Wars movies, they have watched the prequels with me and they love the prequels. They like love all these different aspects of the prequels. And it's been really important to me to be like, okay, is my commitment to bringing them into the Rebel Alliance, or is my commitment to bringing them in the right way that I think is appropriate for them to be a part of the Rebel Alliance and to identify with the same things that I think are really important? And then, so if they come in through the prequels, do I think that they're not as significantly down with the Force or with the Rebel Alliance? And I feel like after the Trump election, you know, you have the rise of like, you know, Indivisible, you have the rise of like Together We Will, you have the rise of literally millions of people who've been activated by the election. And
many of whom are with us here today.
Exactly. And so for those of us who were involved before, if our attitude is kind of like, okay, well, so where were you before, or what were you doing before? That is not at all helpful. I understand the impulse. I understand the like the frustration, but nonetheless, it's like we're in the Rebel Alliance because we want to end the Empire. And so if somebody came in through the prequels, in a lot of ways, the prequels is kind of like representative democracy, where the grassroots resistance is the original movies, and representative democracy in a capitalist system is the prequels. And we don't like it because it's really messy and it's really complicated and it really kind of sucks. And there's like storylines that are confusing and don't even really resonate. But nonetheless, it's like representative democracy, where now many of us are like, we need to win every damn election we possibly can. We need to run people. We need to like be involved in all these ways, and we need to have grassroots resistance. So that brings me to the final point here, which is the Mon Mothma principle. So Mon Mothma is the redheaded rebel leader in Rogue One, and she holds the overall Rebel Alliance in this way that she's trying to keep people at the table who are moderate to radical. She's trying to keep people at the table who have resources but are afraid to directly confront the Empire. And she's also trying to help bring some support to the radical, you know, Jyn Erso, to Admiral Radis, you know, the folks who, you know, of the species that Terry was talking about who had been enslaved. She's trying to keep all these people at the table. And so, but she's also got her eye on the radicals and hoping that the radicals break and kind of like really start moving some stuff. And so when Rogue One starts, you know, moving the fleet and the whole Rebel Alliance starts going after the Empire, after this decision was made that we're not going to do that, Mon Mothma is totally down, and she's able to still hold all of these different people in the movement and then kind of redirect the resources of the Rebel Alliance to back the radicals. But if Mon Mothma had just like jumped in with the radicals and been like, no, we're going to break now, we're going to have a split in the Rebel Alliance, the radicals, the moderates, we're breaking now, all of the people, the resources, the energy, the folks in the Rebel Alliance who weren't down would have been lost. So we need to have Mon Mothmas who are able to hold the big picture and hold the alliance and the relationships. And we need to have the folks that are down, like the Rogue One folks, to just go for it. So the Mon Mothma, big picture, the radicals moving it forward. And we got to have love for people who've been radicalized at whatever period and stage that they're at. And we need to fight the Empire.
Yes. So can I ask y'all, how did the Rebel Alliance come together across species? And was there tensions? Like, were there internal difficulties you want to name?
Also, I wanted to shout out, there's a question from Jamie Moe that there's also the problem of people who are older are considered to be part of the problem and don't get any credit for being involved in the beginning. Just to, if you want to speak to that, Chris, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris, do you want to take that one? And then we'll open up this question about... Yeah,
so I mean, on that point, and also just to kind of broaden out what I said earlier about not needing to be a part of a study group for 10 years. So you don't need to be a part of a study group for 10 years, but it is useful to be a part of a study group for 10 years if you can. And so the Jedi Order with, you know, so Luke Skywalker for me is an incredible example of empowered followership. Luke over and over and over again follows people who are great leaders. Obi-Wan Kenobi, he follows Princess Leia, he follows Yoda, he keeps following people as a way of a journey towards becoming a hero and his own leader. But if he wasn't a follower, he would have missed out on so much. And so if he hadn't listened to the wisdom of Obi-Wan Kenobi, who had been in this fight for more than a generation, then he would have missed out. If he didn't listen to the leadership of Princess Leia, who literally from the day she was born was part of the Rebel Alliance leadership, then he would have lost out. So Luke Skywalker for me is a really good example of why we need to have followership as well as leadership. And that while you can join the Alliance, there's also opportunities for deep growth and knowledge of the force and of the deeper history through intergenerational mentorship, which is also a big part of the alliance. So respecting elders, respecting people who've been in the work, and creating an intergenerational culture that doesn't require a high benchmark for participation, but does have benchmarks for growth, so that we're not stagnating we're all just beginners. We have beginner entry points, but we have benchmarks of growth and opportunity to follow those who have been before to grow in our own leadership.
Yes, absolutely. So what were the tensions between the Rebel Alliance groups and how were they overcome? Do you want to take this one, Morgan, and we'll go across?
This is where I might mix up some of the things I've read in the many Star Wars novels that I read and the movies. But I mean, I think the big ones for anyone who's watched the movie all the movies, again, I go back to one of the things I enjoy about Star Wars is that they don't go too far into that sort of world of like how the politicking of the Rebel Alliance, like within its leadership, they don't show that as much as they show how they're acting together and how their leadership structure is communicating decisions, is discussing. I mean, there are throughout every film when there's moments of big action for volunteers. So when they're gonna go to the Death Star, they say, we're looking for someone to command this mission, and like Han stands up and then Luke comes in and says me too, and it's like, so they're right, so there's some containment of saying we're leadership, but we're asking for volunteers and participation in this, and that's what they show, and I'm glad of that, because I don't know that I would get as much enjoyment out of watching them have meetings about their differences. They're like the Rogue One, the latest film, has a moment when they, are deciding whether to go after the plans for the Death Star, and there's dissension, right? And that, that's a moment in Star Wars that doesn't happen a lot, about showing that. And then Chris, the way Chris kind of explained how it plays out, but that shared vision and value brings people back to the table quickly, even when there's a conflict, right? Because they see what's happening and the way it's playing out, and they're kind of won over by that. And a part of that is that I like that idea of the followership, is that even people who are really experienced and have many years under their belt in the Rebel Alliance in many different roles, whether they're in upper leadership or they're not, like they take ownership over following the lead of the idea and the overall work that's being done, rather than their own, what am I here to get from this? And that I think that's why, like, as a kid and everything, I mean, those were all things that I was like, hey, this sounds fun. Like, I want to go do this and be part of something. And, that one of those aspects of who is the Rebel Alliance is that piece of, it's not about me. It's about me being able to be a part of something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that gives me goosebumps, following the lead of the idea and the work that must be done. Terry.
Yeah, I agree with Morgan. Like, they actually don't go into that exact detail of like the tensions within the Rebel Alliance. I would say was a good example, following on what Morgan and Chris is saying, as I again deep in the history, when it was the pre-Rebel Alliance, when shortly after the prequels, and the Galactic Empire takes over, there's actually numerous rebellions that happen before the Rebel Alliance forms, right? And there's two significant rebellions, and each of those two significant rebellions, what happened was people tried to create their own clone armies. To fight against the Empire. And each one of those failed. Darth Vader discovers them and wipes them out before they could gain steam. And so the actual Rebel Alliance that we end up seeing and that becomes victorious, I think is a more example of like the hard work of the different factions. There was different factions out there, and they didn't force the different factions to just like form under one thing, under like the belief in one exact specific thing. It was, they found out, they applied to what was your interest in defeating the Empire, and being having something that unified them, but still being decentralized in a way, right? Still letting groups have autonomy or so. And like the example I gave earlier of, kind of promoting leadership of former enslaved species, right, to victory. And so, and also women leadership was, it's different. It shows that I think it could be implied, right, that there was like a lot, the Rebel Alliance that eventually came together took a lot more hard work than the previous rebellions, right? And what could be learned from that is like, there's no shortcut to liberation. We can't shortcut away to liberation. We can't build our own clone army or something like that, right? You actually have to lay the hard groundwork of building alliances, of building across like differences or so too, but still uniting and like, okay, we know that this thing is bad and we're going against that, right? And not smoothing over our differences, but like, it's not, we don't get to see it, but I think in real world, like grappling with our differences and was coming out with what unites us and moving forth. So there's no singularity in the alliance. Even after the alliance wins and they form the new republic, it's still very much like autonomous system and like, we're different but together and so forth. I think that is a sort of model for ourselves to move forward with too.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think one example of the kind of coming together across species is, so you have like with the Ewoks and, with the rebel leaders who are working to bring down the shield generator on Endor. And so at first, you have a bunch of different, relationships going on with the Ewoks, and, it's not going good at first. But at the same time, there's also kind of like a kind of looking at the Ewoks and sort of like, they're not taking them very serious as well. But the unifying moment that really comes is when C-3PO tells the story of the Rebel Alliance. And so he tells the story of who the people are in the room. This goes back to, Manju earlier, you had talked about the importance of sharing our personal experiences and our stories. And so being able to tell the story of the Rebel Alliance, and I think this is one of the things that's really key about Star Wars in general, is it's a story that gets told that invites all of us to be a part of the Rebel Alliance. And so, I mean, the fact that my kid is 5 years old wearing a Star Wars shirt today, and the fact that, literally Star Wars is the first memory I have as a 3.5-year-old kid wanting to go see it. The fact that unifies us is that the Star Wars has a story that invites us to join the Rebel Alliance, that invites us to be part of the crew working to defeat evil. And so when they tell the story to the Ewoks are like all on it. They're like, you are part of the tribe, and we are also then part of the Rebel Alliance. And then they throw down big. I mean, if it wasn't for the Ewoks, they would not have been able to bring down the shield generator. And so it's a transformative moment. And again, storytelling was key to that uniting.
Beautiful. So can I just invite y'all to share a quick thought in response to this chat in the chat box, this question about welcoming and meeting people where they're at, and also wanting to be wary of how white people, such as the speaker, expect to be congratulated for showing up, and wanting to hold that truth with POC organizers who might feel rightfully angry when white people show up and expect to be congratulated, especially when white people show up for the express purpose of feeling good about themselves instead of wanting to get free, a fight that doesn't always feel good. And so thinking about this from a Star Wars perspective, how do you welcome people to the Rebel Alliance while also challenging motivations that have more to do with self-esteem or ego or being a traitor than a larger purpose?
I mean, that's a really huge question, and I find myself drifting into like some transference territory where I'm thinking of specific instances and I'm like, actually, I don't have like patience for that. Just like, so, which I think just speaks to that it happens and it's irritating. But that I think it goes back to what all Terry and Chris and I have been coming back to in different ways, is the shared values and beliefs that when they're, when you walk into a room where some great things are happening and there is amazing values and beliefs being shared around moving towards liberation, that an action right, that doesn't give space to that as other places, right, where people self-select out of those spaces because it doesn't make room for that, because there's another process that's happening, and that it's that there are a lot of spaces that actually by their structure give room for that to happen, right? So, you know, being in meetings where people are allowed to introduce themselves and are explicitly asked the question, what brought you here tonight? It's like, well, maybe we don't need to ask that question in front of the whole room, and instead have a greeter at the door ask them one-on-one, what brought you here tonight? And to just kind of think, so that then people have a chance to talk, but then also they have to listen a lot, and listen to other people, and why they're there. And you know, I think like those kinds of like little structure tactics, but then also like what's the vision of the group and how does that manifest in the way that spaces feel.
That's beautiful. I'm going to cut you off right there. That's just perfect. So thanks a million to Morrigan and to Terry and to Chris. I hope you can hear the uproarious applause from all of us, presenters and participants alike. The more you tighten your grips, Tarkin, the more star systems will slip through your fingers.
Yay.
Yeah, we don't actually have time for question and answers, but we do have time for a wrap-up dance party.
Thank you all so much
Thank you.
for participating in the Multiply and Mobilize webinar series. It's been such an enormous fucking pleasure to host all of you. Oh, here comes Lady Azadi. We are planning to do another webinar series. We're not sure how soon it's going to start, but hopefully sometime late summer, early fall, we'll be doing another one. We welcome your suggestions about what kind of topics we should cover, or whether we should try to offer this similar series again. In the meantime, please keep showing up for the conversation in the Facebook group. We're going to keep that open. We're still going to try to host some live events in the Facebook group to actually workshop some of your movement questions related to like the grassroots organizing you're doing on the ground. So please stay tuned for that. More webinars forever. Thank you. Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manju. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Lydia.
May the force be with you.
May the force be with you.